The BRICS bloc of nations has held its 14th summit hosted by China. The bloc, made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China and, of course, South Africa, met virtually yesterday amid Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The sanctions imposed have also been felt by some developing nations and by fellow BRICS member states, including South Africa. In fact, members have been calling for reform as well on some United Nations structures, such as the Security Council and financial institutions. So let's get you a sense of what BRICS nations have been able to resolve, at least so far, at the summit. We'll bring in Professor Anil Sooklal, who is the Deputy DG for Middle East and Asia at Dirco. Prof, it's great to have you with us on the program. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. And perhaps let's begin with our own perspective here in South Africa. What items were on South Africa's agenda going into the summit?
Well, I think there were several critical issues for South Africa, the African continent and the developing world that South Africa wanted addressed at the summit, and which was comprehensively addressed. Firstly, looking at the difficulties we are experiencing on the global front at the present time, the undermining of the multilateral system. So we spoke strongly about reforming and strengthening the global governance architecture, especially the United Nations system, including the Security Council. Looking at the lingering impact of the pandemic, we also raised the issue of working together in addressing the availability of vaccines, medicines and other medical products to effectively address the ongoing impact of the pandemic. Also looking at the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the negative repercussions it's having not just on the global economy but on local economy, including South Africa, especially on issues such as the escalating cost of energy, shortage of food supplies, the logjam in terms of global logistics and supply chains, all of which is impacting very negatively on all of our countries and further exacerbating issues of poverty, hunger and underdevelopment. So these were some of the critical issues that were discussed. And also to further deepen our economic cooperation. BRICS is a very important partner in terms of South Africa's global economic interaction and a source of investment.
Yeah. With China as the current chairperson, and given the very complicated, one would say unprecedented geopolitical backdrop against which this summit takes place, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine for one, how did that influence at least the discussions yesterday insofar as China is concerned and the position that it finds itself in the world at the moment, arguably increasingly isolated?
Well, I think amongst BRICS countries there was understanding for the respective national positions that countries have taken with regard to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We've all agreed to respect our respective positions, but at the same time there was a call to return to discussions and back to the negotiating table and to find a peaceful resolution of the conflict. More importantly, I think there was collective agreement to address the negative impact that the conflict is having on our respective economies. And I don't think there's isolation of any one of the BRICS countries, including China. In fact, China, as the current chair, has been on track in terms of keeping to the calendar of events that we have set for ourselves this year. And all of the events that have been scheduled have been undertaken successfully with substantive outcomes.
I suppose, Professor Sooklal, people listening to that answer from you would perhaps say that BRICS nations wouldn't come out in criticizing one of its BRICS member states like China, right? Insofar as Russia is concerned and the stance that BRICS member states have taken about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, none of the other member states have chosen to speak out very strongly against the invasion of Ukraine. How do you balance that on the one hand versus also addressing the very real challenges globally and in BRICS member states particularly that invasion has caused? I mean, you've talked about the shortage of food supplies as one. That must be a difficult balancing act.
Well, I don't think it's about criticizing. Criticizing does not help the complex situation we find ourselves in. It is being positive and constructive, and I think that's what BRICS has put forward through the summit, that the crisis we are experiencing is not just about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. It's about the unilateral actions taken by a number of developed countries that undermines the global multilateral architecture, that undermines the global economy, and has led to pain and hardship, mainly for developing countries, and South Africa is included. We are all suffering as a result of these unilateral sanctions, and it is the United Nations that should be at the center in trying to resolve this conflict, and not us being forced to take sides. I don't think that the pressure that's being applied to developing countries to take sides is the solution to the crisis.
So these discussions, Professor Sooklal, how do they go further than just being discussions?
Well, as I've indicated, we have 14 ministerial tracks. There have been substantive discussions on all of these. As you are aware, our flagship project, the New Development Bank, has been highly successful. To date, South Africa has benefited to the value of $5.4 million US. 11 projects in the area of infrastructure and sustainable development is being supported through the New Development Bank. We also received $2 million US to address the challenges of the pandemic. Our trade with BRICS countries continue to grow despite the challenges of the pandemic and the conflict. Over the past 5 years, we've had a trade growth of at least 10% per annum. Our trade in 2017 with BRICS countries was about 450 billion US rands. South African rands. Today, that trade is over 726 billion rands. So BRICS is an important trading partner for us, an important partner in addressing the challenges that we are facing globally, not just in terms of the conflict and the pandemic, but also the unfair global architecture that we have. So the solidarity that we have amongst BRICS in collectively addressing these challenges to create a more inclusive, fairer, and equitable global governance architecture at the political, financial, and economic level. I think these are all important endeavors on the part of BRICS.